The social, political, and cultural impact of the Great Depression on American education. The Great Depression of the 1930s was more than an economic catastrophe. It was a national crisis that deeply affected every aspect of American life, including the public education system. As unemployment soared and poverty became widespread, schools faced unprecedented challenges. Funding cuts led to shortened school years, overcrowded classrooms, and underpaid teachers, threatening the very survival of public education. At the same time, political debates erupted over the government's responsibility to maintain educational access during hard times, while cultural attitudes toward schooling shifted as families weighed the immediate need for child labor against the long-term value of education. Yet amid these struggles, new ideas emerged that positioned education as central to the nation's recovery and future stability. The Great Depression profoundly shaped American education by exacerbating social inequalities, forcing political debates over public funding and the role of schools, and transforming cultural attitudes toward education as both a means of survival and a vehicle for national renewal, ultimately laying the foundation for modern federal involvement in schooling and greater attention to at-potential students. The Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash of 1929, devastated American society on multiple levels. Among those hit hardest were the new immigrant communities, particularly Balkan and Eastern Europeans, who had arrived in large waves during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, seeking economic opportunity and freedom after the fall of the Russian, Ottoman, and Austrian-Hungarian empires. Instead, many found themselves mired in poverty, subjected to discrimination, and facing significant obstacles in education, one of the few avenues available for social mobility. Abramitsky et al. 2022. Balkan and Eastern European immigrant families, often from countries such as, but not limited to, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Albania, Bosnia, Serbia, Turkey, typically face linguistic barriers upon arrival. Their children were frequently placed in overcrowded, underfunded urban schools where they were expected to assimilate quickly. The pressure to Americanize came at the cost of their native languages and cultures, which were often stigmatized in school environments. Bilingual education was rare, and many teachers viewed foreign languages as obstacles rather than assets. Covello and D'Agostino, 1958. Economic hardship further exacerbated educational challenges. The Great Depression forced many children, especially from working class immigrant families, to leave school prematurely to help support their households. Truancy laws were inconsistently enforced, and schools in impoverished neighborhoods struggled to stay open. Some even cut programs, shortened school years, or charged fees for supplies that immigrant families could not afford. New immigrant children often bore the brunt of these cutbacks. Webb 2014. Injustice also took the form of discrimination and xenophobia. Nativist sentiments that had been growing since World War I were inflamed by economic crisis. Immigrant children, especially those perceived as un-American due to their accents, customs, Catholic, Christian Orthodox, Jewish, or Muslim religious practices, were often marginalized both socially and academically. Tracking systems disproportionately pushed these students into vocational rather than college preparatory paths, limiting their future opportunities. Greenberg, 2007. Despite these challenges, many new immigrants and their descendants would later rise through the educational and social ranks. However, during the Depression itself, they faced the confluence of economic, cultural, and institutional barriers that reinforced inequality. Their story reflects broader patterns of exclusion and resilience that shaped America's immigrant communities during one of the nation's most trying eras. The experiences of new immigrants during the Great Depression reflect a pivotal moment in the development of American education. Their challenges helped expose inequalities in the public school system, especially around language, class, and cultural assimilation. The pressure to Americanize immigrant children institutionalized the idea that schools were not just places of learning, but tools for shaping national identity, often at the expense of cultural diversity. Lash 2018. At the same time, the economic crisis revealed how closely education was tied to social class. When immigrant children were pushed out of schools to support their families or tracked into vocational programs, it became clear that public education did not offer equal opportunity for all. These injustices fueled later reform movements advocating for bilingual education, culturally responsive teaching, and equal access to academic pathways, especially during the civil rights era and beyond. The struggles of Balkan and Eastern European immigrants during the Great Depression reveal broader social and cultural tensions in early 20th century America. Their experience must be understood in the context of an already fractured society struggling with issues of race, class, religion, and national identity. The influx of immigrants from Eastern Europe and the Balkans before World War I had already stroked fears among established Americans who worried about preserving Anglo-Protestant cultural dominance. Lee, 2019. In schools, this translated into aggressive Americanization efforts that privileged English-speaking Protestant and middle-class norms while marginalizing others. Balkan and Eastern European immigrants, many of whom were Catholic, Christian Orthodox, Jewish, or Muslim, did not fit neatly into the prevailing definitions of whiteness at the time. They were often viewed as ethnic and culturally foreign, which subjected them to xenophobia and discrimination alongside other marginalized groups. In this way, their educational challenges were part of a larger system that stratified society according to perceived racial and cultural hierarchies. African American, Mexican American, Asian, and Native American students faced even harsher forms of exclusion and segregation, but Eastern Europeans still occupied an ambiguous and precarious position on this spectrum. Class further complicated these dynamics. The Great Depression intensified economic inequalities, forcing immigrant children into labor markets and vocational tracks that reinforced class divisions. Public schools became gatekeepers of social mobility, yet access was unequal and often contingent on assimilation. Domina et al., 2017. The promise of education as a great equalizer rang hollow for many immigrant families whose children faced systematic barriers to academic success and professional advancement. Plyer versus Doe, 1982, stands as a pivotal moment in the struggle to protect the educational rights of undocumented immigrant children in the United States. At the heart of this case was a Texas law that permitted public schools to deny enrollment to children who were not legally admitted into the country. Not only did this legislation aim to exclude undocumented students from classrooms, but it also withheld state funding from districts that chose to defy this mandate. This policy was soon challenged by a group of Mexican immigrant families whose children faced the prospect of being deprived of a basic education. When the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices, in a narrow 5-4 decision, struck down the Texas statute, ruling it unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court affirmed that undocumented children, as persons in any ordinary sense of the term, are entitled to the same legal protections as anyone else within U.S. jurisdiction. Moreover, the court emphasized the severe consequences of denying these children access to education. Such exclusion would effectively condemn them to permanent disadvantage. This not only harmed the children individually, but also weakened the broader society by impeding their ability to contribute productively as future workers, citizens, and community members. The Plyer versus Doe decision established a lasting legal precedent. Public schools cannot deny free K-12 education to children based on their immigration status. More broadly, it reinforced the idea that access to education is a fundamental right essential to personal development, social integration, and democratic participation. The ruling also sent a powerful message about the role of schools in American society, not merely as places of learning, but as institutions tasked with upholding equal opportunity and resisting efforts to marginalize vulnerable populations. By protecting undocumented students from exclusion, Plyer versus Doe ensured that the promise of public education would remain accessible to all children regardless of their legal immigration status. In conclusion, the Great Depression and the landmark case Plyer versus Doe have deeply shaped my views on the American education system, highlighting both its vital role in safeguarding opportunity and its ongoing shortcomings in truly serving all students. The Great Depression demonstrated how vulnerable students and families can be in times of economic hardship. During this period, many children were forced to leave school to support their families, and public education systems struggled with underfunding and overcrowded classrooms. It underscored how economic instability can strip away educational access and reveal the need for schools to act as stabilizers during national crisis, ensuring that education remains a right, not a privilege. Similarly, Plyer versus Doe, 1982, which struck down a Texas statute denying funding for education to undocumented immigrant children, reaffirmed the idea that education is a fundamental protection that should not be withheld based on status. The court's decision emphasized that denying children access to education would create a permanent underclass and undermine the nation's commitment to equality and justice. This case reinforces my belief that education must remain inclusive and protective, especially for society's most vulnerable population. Despite these legal and historical affirmations of educational access as a right, I believe our system still has much work to do, particularly when it comes to potential students, including those from low-income families, immigrant backgrounds, or those with learning differences. Too often, these students face systematic barriers such as rigid standardized testing, under-resourced schools, and culturally unresponsive teaching practices. These issues can limit their ability to thrive, even when they possess great potential. The Great Depression profoundly reshaped American education by exacerbating inequalities, igniting political debates over schools' responsibilities, and recasting education as essential for national survival, a legacy further reinforced by later rulings like Plyer versus Doe, which affirmed the right of all children to learn. Together, these historical moments laid the foundation for modern federal involvement in education and a growing commitment to support at potential students. Yet, as history reminds us, guaranteeing access alone is not enough. To truly honor this legacy, schools today must advance beyond access and ensure meaningful empowerment and opportunity for every learner, especially those most vulnerable to being left behind. Only through this ongoing effort can public education fulfill its role as a true engine of social mobility and justice. Please take a few moments to review the references for this presentation.